Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking at a really fascinating source, a letter from Thomas Paine, one of the key voices of the American Revolution. We're using it to maybe get a sharper view on that whole period.
That's right. The source is Paine's A Letter Addressed to the Abbe Raynal. And, well, Paine basically wrote it because he thought this very famous European writer, the Abbe Raynal, had just gotten some fundamental things wrong about the American Revolution, even with good intentions.
So it's kind of like getting the inside track, a direct, pretty fiery correction from someone who was right there in the thick of it.
Exactly. Pushing back against an outsider's view.
Okay, so our goal here is to follow Paine's arguments, see where he thought Raynal missed the mark.
Yeah, and uncover what Paine saw as the real causes, the real events, the character of the people involved. Might find some surprising stuff.
All right, let's dig in. First off, who was this Abbe Raynal? Why did Paine feel the need to, write this whole letter?
Well, the Abbe Raynal was a big deal in Europe, known for his historical, philosophical writings. He wrote about the American Revolution, but, from Europe.
So distant.
Very distant. Paine felt he was looking at it theoretically, and he says Raynal was bound to mistake several facts or misconceive the causes or principles.
Basically get it wrong because he wasn't there.
Pretty much. So Paine wanted to rectify those mistakes. He said he wanted to prevent even accidental errors intermixing with history. Set the record straight.
Makes sense. And there was something else bothering Paine, too, wasn't there? About how the Abbe's work was published.
Yeah, a bit of personal irritation. Apparently, the Abbe's work got published in London, maybe without his final say-so. Paine called it unfairly purloined.
Huh, like literary theft.
Kind of. Paine brings up literary justice, saying, look, the works of an author are his legal property. An interesting side point about copyright even then.
Right. But the main event, the mistakes, was the first big one. Paine tackles the absolute foundation.
It's the causes of the revolution. That's where Paine starts. He quotes this passage from Raynal that he finds just extraordinary.
What does Raynal say?
Raynal claimed, basically, that none of those energetic causes existed in North America.
Energetic causes.
Yeah.
Like the usual stuff that sparks revolutions.
Exactly. Raynal meant things like, major religious persecution, fundamental laws being trampled, people dragged to dungeons, big shifts in government principles. None of that, he said.
So what was the cause, according to Raynal?
He boiled it down, said the whole question was reduced to whether the mother country had a right to lay a slight tax.
A slight tax. Okay, I've definitely heard that version before.
Oh, yeah, it persists. And Paine just completely rejects it. His counterargument is simple, really powerful. None can feel like those who suffer.
You had to live it.
Right. For a man to be a competent judge, he must have resided in America. You couldn't grasp the real energetic causes from an ocean away.
And Paine, cleverly, uses Raynal's own words against him, right?
Oh, this is brilliant. He digs up something Raynal wrote elsewhere about the Stamp Act back in 1764. That's 12 years before independence.
What did Raynal say about the Stamp Act?
Raynal himself called it an usurpation of the Americans' most precious and sacred rights.
Wow. So Raynal himself identified a major violation of rights way back then.
Exactly. Paine basically says, look, you yourself called this an energetic cause 12 years earlier. How can you now say there were none? It totally undercuts Raynal's argument about it just being a slight tax later on.
Gotcha. So the roots went much deeper than Raynal suggested in that later passage. What about the act after the Stamp Act was repealed? The Declaratory Act. Paine saw that as even worse, didn't he?
Oh, absolutely. The Declaratory Act. That stated Parliament had the power to bind America in all cases whatsoever. Paine calls that infinitely more mischievous magnitude.
In all cases whatsoever. That phrase sounds absolute.
It was absolute. That was the crux.
Yeah.
Paine argues it meant Americans had no rights at all. It wasn't just about taxes anymore. It was about total absolute dominion.
Making them vassals, not subjects.
That's his word. Vassal. And here's the key insight Paine offers, something maybe less obvious. This tyranny wasn't like old school tyrants breaking the law. This was tyranny established by law. Parliament was claiming legal authority to be absolute.
So the fight wasn't really about the 3 pence tax on tea.
No, not the amount. It was the principle. Could Parliament bind them in all cases whatsoever? Paine says the tea tax was just an experiment to see if they could get away with enforcing that declaratory act, that claim of absolute power.
And Paine even admits some Americans back then didn't always frame it perfectly.
Right. He notes that, people felt the injustice deeply, but sometimes they got caught up arguing about the amount of the tax rather than nailing down the fundamental issue, Parliament's claim to total supremacy.
That really clarifies the core conflict.
Okay.
Moving beyond causes, Paine also thought Raynal misunderstood the people involved, the British character, the American spirit.
Yeah, he paints a pretty stark picture of British behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Talks about vulgar abuse, haughtiness. He has this great line that Britain lost the colonies as much from her manners as from her injustice.
So just being arrogant and disrespectful was as damaging as the policies.
That's Paine's take. He felt it was a lesson for everyone, showing how necessary it is to conduct the business of government with civility. Basic respect matters.
And how did he describe the American response, their character?
He portrays it as this transformation where unoffending humility was tortured into rage. He emphasizes the incredible unity, a union so extensive, continued and determined, suffering with patience and never in despair.
That kind of unity Paine felt must come from something deep.
Yeah, not just politics as usual. He said it had to be rooted in something capable of reaching the whole soul of man, different from older revolutions that were just about squabbles between factions.
And their conduct in the war.
He praises that too, says there was no foul finger of disgrace, nor the bloody hand of vengeance. He talks about lenity and victory, laws that weren't overly harsh. War was a business of necessity, he says, done without cruelty, and ended without revenge.
Given Britain's actions, what did Paine suspect was their real goal all along?
Paine came to believe it was the fixed determination of the British cabinet to quarrel with America at all events. He didn't see it as just mistakes.
He thought they wanted to fight.
He suspected they expected to conquer America easily, turn it into a source of revenue, like rent, and they saw the colonial charters, American progress, as just obstacles to eventually sweep away.
Wow, that's a darker view. Not just bundling, but intentional conflict. Okay, let's switch to specific events. Paine really took issue with Raynal's descriptions of key battles, didn't he?
Oh, definitely. He found Raynal's accounts coldly and carelessly stated, said they were erroneous and most of them defective and obscure. Basically, too focused on fancy writing, not enough on facts.
And he zeroed in on Trenton and Princeton, that critical winter campaign?
Yes. Late 76, early 77. Events, Paine says, were moments where the fate of America stood for a while trembling. And Raynal, he covers these huge turning points in just a single paragraph, faintly conceived and barren of character, circumstance, and description.
So what was Raynal's version? Very brief, you said.
Super brief. Raynal claims the Americans fell accidentally upon Trenton, just stumbled onto them, and then massacred, taken, or dispersed the Hessians. Princeton gets a similar quick mention.
Accidentally. Paine must have had a field day correcting that.
Oh yeah, he paints this vivid picture of the lead-up. The brutal retreat across New Jersey, 90 miles, 19 days, deep winter, without tent or blanket, supplies abandoned, the army just melting away.
Setting the stage for how desperate things were.
Exactly. A crisis rather of danger than of hope. And then he makes it absolutely clear. Trenton was not an accident. It was the very object of Washington's incredibly daring crossing of the Delaware.
In the middle of the night, storms, ice.
All of it. Pure planning and determination.
Paine even includes that detail about a warning letter, right? Adds a bit of irony.
He does. Apparently, a British loyalist sent a warning note to the Hessian commander, Colonel Roll. The Americans found it later, but the Hessians were still surprised.
How?
Paine explains a small, separate American detachment had crossed earlier, got into a skirmish, and retreated. The Hessians thought that was the main attack and it was over. So when Washington's main force hit, Roll made a more capital and real mistake by being unprepared.
So a small American mix-up led to a huge Hessian blunder.
Kind of, yeah. Paine then describes the scene at Trenton after the first assault. The creek dividing the town, Americans holding one side, British and remaining Hessians the other.
And they were trapped. No way back across the river.
That's the point Paine stresses. The Delaware was choked with ice, impassable. The main escape route blocked by British reinforcements arriving under Cornwallis. If America's fate hung on one day, Paine says this was it.
So what happened the next morning? The British ready to crush them.
Paine describes this amazing scene, elegant as it was unexpected. The British are forming up, ready to attack the trapped Americans. Suddenly, a rider comes tearing in from Princeton.
News.
Yeah, frantic news. Washington had attacked the British garrison at Princeton that very morning. The British were stunned, in consternation. They immediately turned around and marched back towards Princeton.
Wait, how did Washington get to Princeton? He was trapped at Trenton.
This is the genius move Paine highlights. During the night, Washington left campfires burning to trick the British into thinking his army was still there.
A classic deception.
Right. Then, under cover of darkness and the fires, he took his army on this incredibly difficult roundabout march, 18 miles or so, hitting Princeton at dawn.
That's incredible strategic thinking. A world away from accidentally falling upon Trenton.
Absolutely. Paine calls Princeton a happy stroke of generalship. It totally wrecked the British plans, forced them out of their forward positions, and essentially ended their winter campaign.
He has that funny detail about the cannon fire, too.
Yeah. The British back near Trenton heard the distant cannons from Princeton and supposedly thought it was thunder, though in the depth of winter. Shows how confused they were.
So Trenton and Princeton together, what was the impact?
They completely reversed the momentum, saved the Continental Army, saved the Revolution, really, forced the main British Army under Howe and Cornwallis to pull all the way back to Brunswick, New Jersey, where they basically sat tight for almost 5 months. Huge strategic victory, totally missed by Raynal's account.
Okay, another area Paine dives into is finance, American paper money. Raynal saw it as a disaster, right?
Yeah, Raynal's view, as Paine presents it, was pretty negative, called it ideal riches, basically worthless paper, said it depreciated rapidly, people refused to take it, Congress acted like despots, making it treason not to accept it. And he put the debt at this huge figure, over 40 million pounds sterling.
Sounds bad. How did Paine counter that?
Well, Paine admits it's complicated, even for Americans at the time. He says the paper money's active days are over, it's been consigned to rest. But he insists it was crucial, a cornerstone of the war effort.
So how did it actually work, according to Paine? What did Raynal miss?
Here's Paine's really interesting, maybe counterintuitive point. The depreciation was the tax.
Wait, the loss in value was the tax. How does that work?
Think about it. The government couldn't really levy taxes effectively during the war, so they printed money, people accepted it because they believed in the cause. But as more was printed, its value naturally went down.
Okay.
So the public paid for the war by willingly absorbing that loss in value on the money they held. Every time the money lost value, it was like a bit was taxed away.
Wow. So it wasn't a debt piling up to be paid later. It was the cost being paid right then by everyone holding the money.
That's exactly Paine's argument. He says government had no hand in it. Every man depreciated his own money by his own consent. By continuing to use it, knowing it was losing value, people were consenting to pay the cost that way.
That is a completely different way of looking at it. Not a farrier, but a kind of distributed, self-imposed war tax through inflation.
Right. He compares it to regular taxes. Taxation feels like you're paying something out. Depreciation felt more like the value just dissipated. But the end result, the cost borne by the public over time, was similar.
And Britain was hoping this currency would just collapse and win them the war.
Paine calls that extreme folly, like a famished lion watching for prey at a spider's web. He thought they were totally misjudging its resilience and function.
Did he contrast America's finances before and after?
He did. Sharp contrast. Before independence, even in peacetime, America was running into debt under British rule. After independence, during a massive war, they managed without needing credit, stores were full, and eventually gold and silver started circulating again. For Paine, those facts proved the system, however unorthodox, actually worked for the purpose it served.
Fascinating. Okay, let's move to another critical point. The French alliance and the British peace offers in 1778. Paine says Raynal got the timing completely wrong.
Yes, and this is where Paine's own role, he was Secretary for Foreign Affairs for Congress, gives him undeniable authority. He's correcting Raynal from first-hand knowledge.
So what was Raynal's version of events?
Raynal claimed that when the British offered terms in 1778, pretty generous terms, everything except independence, the Americans rejected them because they already felt confident. Why? Because, Raynal says, they knew about the French alliance, which he dates as signed February 8th, 1778.
So Raynal thought Americans rejected the deal because they knew France had their back.
That's the gist of Raynal's explanation. But Paine jumps in first. He corrects the treaty signing date to February 6, 1778, a minor point. But then he lays out the actual timeline of when things happen in America. and it changes everything.
Okay, give the real sequence according to Paine.
Right. Treaty signed in Paris, February 6th. British peace offers Lord North bills introduced in Parliament February 17th. And Paine notes Charles Fox actually announced the French treaty signing in Parliament that same day.
Oh. So the British knew about the alliance when they made their offer.
Precisely. They were reacting to it. Then, these British offers are rushed across the Atlantic. They arrive in America on April 21st, 1778. Congress gets them right away.
And their response?
Immediate. They formally reject the British offers the very next day, April 22nd, 1778.
Okay. Treaty February 6th. Offers arrive April 21st. Rejected April 22nd. So when did news of the French treaty actually reach America?
This is the killer point. News of the French treaty arrived on May 2nd, 1778.
May 2nd. That's 11 days after they rejected the British offer.
Exactly. Paine states unequivocally, as Foreign Secretary, Congress had not the least notice or idea the treaty was done when they made that rejection. They hadn't even heard from Benjamin Franklin and the commissioners in Paris for over a year.
So the rejection had absolutely nothing to do with knowing France was committed.
Nothing. It was purely based on, as Paine puts it, America's fixed, unvaried sentiments and her determination to support her independence to the last possible effort. Principle and resolve, not strategic calculation based on the alliance.
And for Paine, that makes the rejection much more significant.
Absolutely. Far more glorious, he argues. The vigor of determination and spirit of defiance shown then, before they knew help was officially on the way, that demonstrates real fortitude in a time of uncertainty. If they'd known about the treaty, it would just look like confidence born of good news, not brave resolve.
He really underscores their commitment.
It does. And Paine adds, the fact Britain rushed the offers over likely means they knew about the treaty and were desperately trying to get a deal done before the Americans found out, shows British desperation, not American calculation based on the treaty.
Paine quotes from the actual Congress rejection report, too, doesn't he? What did they say?
Yeah, the report from April 22nd is pretty sharp. It calls the offers evidence of British weakness and wickedness. They point out Britain demanded submission before, but only offers terms now after military setbacks.
Hypocrisy.
Right. And the idea of needing a pardon, Congress saw that as implying they were criminals for defending their rights. Their bottom line was clear. Britain withdraws its forces or acknowledges independence. No compromise on that.
Standing firm on principle.
Totally. And Paine mentions the later reply in June, after the treaty news arrived. Congress just calmly referred back to their April 22nd decision and added they'd negotiate only as equals, as independent nations, respecting their new treaty obligations.
Paine also didn't like Raynal's descriptions of the Allies' national characters, did he? Seemed a bit unfair.
Yeah, he really pushed back against what he called Raynal's cynical and unjust portrayals. Raynal described the French as hasty, light, disdainful, the Spanish as jealous, haughty, sly, slow, and then casts doubt on America.
Questioning American loyalty to the alliance.
Asking if the American is secretly snatching looks at the mother country and would rejoice at the disasters of his allies. Really loaded stuff.
Sounds like cheap stereotypes. How did Paine respond?
He called them foolish portraits, unphilosophical. Why not focus on the positives? He mentions French greatness of character, their superiority of heart, Spanish lenity, American invariable lenity.
And he totally rejected the idea America was looking for a way out of the alliance.
Absolutely. He points back again. Rejecting the British offers before knowing about the treaty proves their commitment. He also notes that even in captured private letters, there was never any sign of disloyalty. And he adds that the American public was genuinely upset when they heard news of the French Admiral de Grasse losing a fleet showing real connection, not secret resentment.
Raynal also questioned France's motives, suggesting it wasn't about universal good.
Right. Raynal doubted the happiness of mankind has any part in it. Paine dismisses this as speculation. Who knows private motives? He argues the focus should be on the positive results, extended civilization, future good.
What did Paine see as America's motive?
Simple. Continued good to all posterity. A long-term vision.
And France's, not just self-interest.
Paine argues France wasn't acting out of pure necessity like America was. He suggests they acted from a fitness in the mind, an attraction to a good cause. He believes good causes can't be sustained long by bad motives. He uses this nice little allegory comparing allies to suitors. Some are just fortune hunters, but others are genuinely enamored of her innocence and stick by through thick and thin.
Suggesting the Franco-American bond became more than just strategic.
Exactly. Deepened through shared effort. He also brushes off concerns about a monarchy allying with a republic, says forms of government are internal matters. In alliances, nations act like relatively republics with each other, points to France and Switzerland's long alliance as proof. He thinks this mixing of nations is good anyway, helps destroy prejudice.
Okay, let's look at the end of the letter, the postscript. Paine looks ahead, reflects on the future beyond the war.
Yeah, he starts by saying American independence is solid, firmly established by demonstrated power, not just time. Then he gives his blistering critique of British policy towards America.
What does he say?
Calls it conceived in idiotism and acted in madness. Says it showed a total ignorance of mankind.
Wow. Strong stuff. What was their fundamental mistake, in his view?
Misjudging people. He thought the earlier British ministry acted as if they supposed mankind to be without a mind, unable to feel deep offense. And the current ministry, in 1782, acted as if America was without a memory, expecting them to just forget everything. Failure to understand psychological consequences.
He even offers advice on the peace treaty, like about Canada and Halifax. Seems surprising.
It is. He argues it's ill policy for Britain to try and hold on to those places. He predicts any settlers there will eventually feel American anyway, drawn by liberty, commerce, the land itself. Nature alone will do the whole, he says.
So Britain pays the cost, America gets the benefit eventually.
That's his point. He sees those territories as future fields of jealousy and thorns, bound to revolt eventually. Better for Britain to just cut ties cleanly, disentangle herself.
Makes a similar argument about Gibraltar, too.
Yeah, another costly position. Says it needs a navy to support it, but Spain can always blockade it and make it useless, even if they can't capture the rock itself. Quips, the easiest way to take Gibraltar is to beat the British fleet.
Paine also makes this interesting distinction between types of national power.
Yes, permanent power versus accidental power. Permanent power is things like population, resources, location, the fundamentals. Accidental power is temporary, like having a bigger navy right now.
And his point regarding Britain and France
is that France has greater permanent power. So if France decides to focus on it, she can build a bigger navy than Britain. Britain's mistake is assuming its past naval dominance is permanent, ignoring France's underlying potential.
He also talks about freedom of the seas.
Yeah, he sees the Allies, America, France, Spain, as taking the popular part by pushing for perfect freedom of the ocean, calls the sea the world's highway, says any nation claiming special rights over it is wrong and invites challenge.
And even suggests a future treaty clause.
A visionary idea for the time. Limit warships in peacetime. Says navies don't improve manners or morals.
He ends with a pretty grand call for Britain to change its whole outlook.
A really powerful conclusion. He urges Britain towards a total reformation, an expanded mind, a heart which embraces the universe. Renounce prejudice and inveteracies, mix with the world, be the enemy of none. No time for petty politics or corruption.
That's his vision of what makes a nation truly great.
Exactly. Not conquest, but extending principles of universal society, seeing all humanity as one creation, valuing amiable virtues. He hopes the revolution can spark a whole new system of extended civilization.
Okay, let's wrap this up. What are the main things we've pulled from this deep dive into Paine's letter?
Well, first, it's a stark reminder of how an outside view, like Raynal's, can miss the lived reality. It wasn't just a slight tax. Paine shows it was a fundamental battle over rights and absolute power claimed by law.
And we got Paine's passionate defense of the American character, the resilience, the unity, the principled conduct in war, driven by something profound.
We saw the real story of Trenton and Princeton, not accidents, but calculated, brilliant, strategic moves that saved the cause. Total correction of Raynal there.
Plus, that fascinating counterintuitive explanation of paper money, not as debt, but as a kind of self-imposed tax through depreciation, the way the public directly bore the war's cost.
It may be the most crucial correction. The timeline proving America rejected Britain's offers before knowing about the French alliance. That wasn't opportunism, it was pure, unwavering resolve based on principle. Paine nails that down.
And finally, that bigger vision in the postscript, urging Britain, and by extension all nations, towards a more open, less prejudiced, more universal approach to the world.
Right. He saw the revolution and the alliance as ways to fight prejudice, which he famously called the spider of the mind.
Which kind of leaves us with a thought from Paine himself. He believed these events helped people realize their old opinions were prejudices and nothing else, and relieved from their shackles, enjoy freedom of mind. So the question for us today might be, what prejudices, what spiders of the mind might be holding us back now from seeing things clearly or connecting with others?